First of all, briefly on the politics. We have entered a new era of progressive politics, which, if we do it right, could last 30 to 40 years. It is something I have literally spent my entire adult life working for. I was a 20-year-old intern in the United States Congress working for my Senator, Bill Fulbright, who was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, when the last conservative era started in the midterm elections of 1966, when the Democrats suffered terrible losses. And I knew after that it would be very difficult for us to hold the White House. The people were voting on fear and division, upset about civil rights, women's rights, busing, riots in the streets, Vietnam, you name it. And the Republicans developed in that election a message that exploited the resentments and exploited the fears and exploited the divisions. We had a chance to overcome it in 1968, the first election in which I was old enough to vote, because Robert Kennedy explicitly tried to reach across the divide, but when he was killed, we lost our chance, and they won. President Nixon, who was actually a communist compared to most people who came after him, he basically, he believed in affirmative action. He signed the bill creating the Environmental Protection Agency. He still thought arithmetic mattered when you put budgets together. Went to China, you know. But they were really good at dividing people and building on resentments, the silent majority and all that, which was a racial code signal, really. And they rocked along with that until President Reagan came along with his unique contribution to this, where Reagan could tell a story like nobody, and he convinced people government would screw up a two-car parade. And then he convinced them that 2 and 2 was 4 everywhere in the wide world except in Washington, D.C., where arithmetic didn't matter anymore. And trickle-down economics was actually good for poor people and middle-class people. And with those two strains, the cultural division and the corporative economics, they managed to triple the government debt in 12 years while incomes continued to drop for middle-class people. And then came the second President Bush. I'll say more about that in a minute, but from 68 to 2000, the Democrats only won the presidency twice. Once because of Watergate, when President Carter won, and then when I was elected and the country was in trouble economically, and then I was reelected partly because the country was already changing and because people thought that we had proved that government didn't have to mess up the two-car parade, that could actually make people's lives better. But in this whole period, the Republicans had a base vote of about 45%, and ours was about 40%, which should tell you all you need to know about why we didn't win the White House very much. We had to get 2/3 of the undecided vote to win. They only had to get 1/3. So we either had to be twice as good as they were as politicians, or we had to have very bad conditions. All national elections are determined by 3 things: the underlying political culture, the conditions of the time, and the quality of the candidates. Now, sometime in my second term, our political basis began to even up, partly because of the performance, but I have to give credit where credit's due. I think the biggest reason was that America was changing. We were growing more diverse. We were moving away from being a biracial nation to being a multiracial, multicultural, multi-religious nation, more oriented psychologically to communitarian solutions. So in 2098, the Democrats won the midterm elections for the first time since 1822 in the 6th year of a president's term. Thanks in no small measure to some of you in this audience. Now, in 2000, the Republicans got close enough to get it in the Supreme Court and win 5-4. In a decision that I still believe will go down in history as one of the 5 worst decisions ever handled. But to give credit where credit is due, President Bush ran a brilliant campaign in 2000. That compassionate conservatism was a brilliant slogan which reflected his gut understanding that the country had changed. They wouldn't tolerate overt racism anymore. Besides, he had a good relationship with the Latino community in Texas and a fairly progressive position on immigration at the time. But that they hadn't quite come over to the side that the government should be an integral partner to our future designs. So compassionate conservatism meant to swing voters, not their base, hey, I'll give you everything Bill Clinton did with a smaller government and a bigger tax cut. Wouldn't you like that? But then, after he won, he ran into the old adage that life's greatest curse can be answered prayers. Because for the first time since President Nixon was elected in 1968 and President Reagan added to their message in the 1980 election, the American people actually got to see what would happen if they could do what they had been talking about all this time. And they didn't like it very much. The 2002 and 2004 elections occurred in the shadow of 9/11. We had never replaced a president during an ongoing conflict, but the margin of victory was the smallest since Woodrow Wilson's in 1916. 2006, the Democrats won the Congress. And just like 40 years earlier, in 1966, it was the canary in the coal mine. And I told Hillary the morning after the 2006 election, I said, if we don't nominate a convicted felon, we're going to win in 2008. And there's nothing they can do about it. So look at what happened in 2008. We had a better candidate, they had terrible conditions, and the culture was with us. America is a different place today. We don't have time for vis-a-vis over race or gender or sexual orientation or anything else. We know that we live in an interdependent country in an interdependent world.